Let me start out by saying that I really hope you're ashamed of yourselves. If not, you should be. Each and every one of you. Okay, can you hear me now? That doesn't stop you from being ashamed of yourself. There are no buys. And that goes for you watching at home, too. Not only are you in a holy place, physically or virtually, but you're here on the holiest day of the week, the Sabbath. And you're all breaking one or more of the hundreds of rules that govern the Sabbath. Whether by what you're wearing, how you're sitting, the way you're acting. Now, the whole bunch of you are guilty of improprieties and violations. Don't look that way. Musicians don't get off either. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Jesus? No. Welcome to a taste of the reception Jesus received in today's gospel reading from the leader of the synagogue. And what egregious wrong did Jesus do? He healed a woman who was crippled, permanently locked in a bent-over position for 18 years. And that simple act of compassion, the synagogue leader said, constituted work which is forbidden on the Sabbath. Boy, was that ever the wrong charge to level against Jesus. And the synagogue leader quickly discovered that. Jesus asked, is it permitted on the Sabbath to untie an animal you own, like an ox or a donkey, and lead it to water so it won't die of dehydration? Now, the synagogue leader doesn't answer. But as Michael Chen, who's an assistant professor of Old Testament at the Luther Seminary, says, he doesn't have to. The assumed answer, of course, is yes. Chen points out, it is both practical and permissible for an animal keeper to untie his animal and lead it to water. The easement given to animal keepers staves off death by dehydration, thus protecting not only the life of the animal, but also the economic interests of the owner. In this method of argumentation, it follows that if the less valuable animal is given an easement to stave off death, then this oppressed woman should also receive an easement for her illness. Well, Jesus' argument from the lesser to the greater, which he uses, by the way, very effectively on many occasions in the Gospels, is met with cheers from the others in the synagogue. And the synagogue leader is put in his place. But Jesus also puts the Sabbath in its place. Oh yes, observing the Sabbath is one of God's commandments, but not the greatest and most important one, at least not according to Jesus. That distinction belongs to, ye shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. Closely followed by the commandment that's akin to it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And you can stop right there, since Jesus tells us that on those two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. Those two commandments are the bedrock, the foundation for everything else. Adhere to those two, and the others are set into place. Don't murder. Don't covet. Respect. Everything stems from that. That's what Jesus tells us. But maybe the synagogue leader wasn't listening. Or maybe he forgot. Why else would he be so bent out of shape over Jesus healing a woman who was truly bent out of shape? A woman who, like Jesus, was in a synagogue sharing her love of God. A woman who became the direct beneficiary of Jesus showing his love for his neighbor. This isn't the first time that Luke writes of a Sabbath healing by Jesus, nor will it be the last. One tradition holds that Luke was a physician and therefore had a special interest in this aspect of Jesus' ministry. But there's another reason. And although Luke doesn't spell it out in so many words, it's obvious. Healing isn't work for Jesus. Healing is the essence of Jesus. Jesus came to heal the world and all who are in it. Healing is perhaps the highest manifestation of Jesus' love, and therefore of God's love. This incident, which as I mentioned occurs only in Luke, invites us to reflect on the message on a broader level and on the Sabbath in a broader level. Traditionally, there are two views of why God gave us the Sabbath. One, found in Exodus, considers the Sabbath as marking the end of God's 6 days of creation. However, since we Congregationalists like to substitute commas for periods, it also marks God's handing over creation to humans to continue. Creation then becomes a critical link between God and us. The other view is found in Deuteronomy. It sees the Sabbath as rooted in freedom, commemorating Israel's liberation from Egyptian bondage. Both of those views are consistent with today's passage. Jesus, who repeatedly affirms that he's an observant Jew, isn't overthrowing or rejecting the Sabbath. Instead, he's presenting an exegesis by example, changing our understanding of the Sabbath, expanding it to encompass its real reason for being beyond the pedantic procedures or prohibitions. And by doing so, he's inviting us to create better, more meaningful ways to live and practice the two fundamental commandments. He's also freeing us, just as he freed the bent woman, removing any obstacles or impairments that work against that creation, and thereby empowering us. And there's a third view of the Sabbath. It's drawn from the entirety of the New Testament and grounded in Jesus' elaboration that I mentioned. This one exists on the most intimate of levels. It's Jesus' promise that when any of us is bent over from the weight of the world or from individual existence, he'll be right there in the Sabbath to heal even if we can't always see him with eyes that are fused toward the ground. I'd be remiss if I didn't add that these days, unfortunately, the Sabbath has fallen into disregard. The late Rabbi Abraham Heschel, I'm sure many of you have heard of him, is one of the most profound thinkers and committed social activists, takes note of this in his seminal work, The Sabbath, a clarion call to examine the day and its importance for us now. It's affected not only contemporary Judaism, but Christianity as well. You have to understand, and I won't get into it, but Heschel was the rabbi that Catholic and Protestant ministers and theologians came to for advice. He was that well respected. In Heschel's mind, the greatest challenge facing the modern Western world is the loss of a sense for the sacred, says Rabbi Orr Rose, who's director of the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership. Heschel, he goes on to say, argues that in our attempts to master our physical surroundings through technological advancement, we've become desensitized to the grandeur and beauty of life, both in the natural world and in the faces of other people. In our rush to industrialize, we've become so focused on gaining economic and political power that we've forgotten our ultimate purpose, to serve as co-creators with the divine in the establishment of a just and compassionate world. Co-creators of a just and compassionate world. Sound familiar? Sound like something Jesus might say with respect to how we should regard the Sabbath? With apologies for oversimplifying, Heschel looks at the world as consisting two things. Three if you hit the microphone. Space and time. Space is the realm of physical things, like that guitar you're holding, and you paid money for. While time is the realm of the eternal. In Heschel's words, time is the presence of God in the world of space. It is the dimension of time wherein man meets God. He goes on to say, there is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. He goes on to say, 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to holiness in time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. It sounds like Heschel and Jesus would be very comfortable sitting next to each other in the synagogue on the Sabbath. On a closing note, my wife, who always lends her wisdom to my sermons and leaves the foolishness to my own devices, wanted me to remind you that when you arrived this morning, or got up, if you're not with us physically, it was winter. But especially if you share a bit of fellowship with us after the service, when you leave, it'll be spring. The seasons change. I think it's somewhere around 11:30 or so. Yeah. God wasn't afraid of creation that encompasses change. Either was Jesus. Maybe we should follow their example. Amen.